Namaste, Narad, and welcome to you. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you.
It's a joy to see you. This series was started by Narad and on his insistence, and I still, every time, I remind myself that this would not be possible without you. So, even when you are not able to come online at this time because it's a late hour for you, you're always present with us, and we miss you when we don't see you. Yes. So today is our last session on this theme. And so we will be taking up the questions which have been pending. There were perhaps several questions which were in the chat box also, which I might have missed in trying to integrate. So for those of you who feel your question might have been missed, do please restate it in the chat box. For now, I have collected all the questions which were from the chat box as well as from the emails, and we'll take them up in sequence, most of them relating to this topic. Some of the questions also remind us of aspects of the theme that particularly last time we might have missed. So I will start with Vaijayanti's question. She writes, in the recent episode, you spoke about body, mind, cell mind, etc. In the traditional yoga, we see many yogis having control over their body. For example, Swami Rama, a Himalayan yogi, is in one of the experiments, created a 10-degree temperature difference between 2 points on the palm of his hand. He also demonstrated voluntary control over the heart rate, even stopping his heart from pumping blood for a short time. Is it the same as that of body mind or the cellular mind of which you were speaking? Yes. In the Hatha Yoga particularly, and I don't mean by traditional yoga all the systems of yoga. Within the traditional, there are many systems. But what Vaijayanti is referring to is particularly in the Hatha Yoga practices, one can acquire an extraordinary control over the physical body, its functions, and even push the functions and operations of the body beyond the limit of what is considered normal, and even push it beyond the limit of what is considered possible by science, beyond the chemical limits, beyond biological limits, and in certain cases, even beyond physical limits. For example, one can control the body weight simply by pulling the body, so to say, by the life force. All of these operations are functions of the life force working on the physical body and through the physical body, bypassing the limits of the biology. Now, optimally, the person is operating from the life energy and applying the life force on the body, and normally need not have control or mastery of the body consciousness. But normally, as a result, as a consequence of the Hatha Yoga practices, they would have also developed the body consciousness to quite an extraordinary degree. Normally, it is not always the case. It doesn't mean that just because somebody is a very skilled, capable, or flexible, that they have developed body consciousness or they have controlled or mastered the life force operating on the body. Now, I have seen the case, and I will not name him, you might guess from the description. One of the very famous Indian Hatha Yoga teachers who became famous because he went on the live on US TV and from there acquired greater fame. And even the entire school is now named after him. The name is not important, but the idea is, having seen him physically, and I saw him when he was in his mid-80s, I saw the extraordinary flexibility his body had. I saw the extraordinary vitality, life force that he had, and a tremendous power and arrogance which came with it. There had not been the refinement necessary. So, if it's yoga, the fulfillment of yoga was not done. The approach to the self had not been worked upon. But purely as a Hatha Yoga practitioner with the power that comes from asanas and pranayam, he had pushed to a certain limit. With the vitality that he had, he could drive the body quite an extent. but he had not pushed it to the point where it crosses those limits of the biology. He had not, to the extent I could see at least, and I put myself in a limitation there, he had not developed the body consciousness to a degree which I have seen others with far less fame or skill or flexibility having developed. For example, a dancer. And you take any kind of dance, especially the dances which involve refinement of consciousness and expression of refinement. The body consciousness there would be enormously more developed. Even I will take an example of somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, although building muscles and having won uh, the world's highest title of Mr. Universe multiple times, it was not crude muscular development. He had developed body consciousness. And his body consciousness probably was more than this person. A dancer, a ballet dancer, or any skilled dancer of any kind, where refinement is the goal, would have normally developed body consciousness much more than this man. So what I'm saying is, it's not enough that you're a Hatha Yogi. It also matters which direction you directed your effort. Did you even try to make your body conscious? In his case, he had not. Whatever consciousness he developed was incidental to his name and fame in becoming a famous teacher in teaching others asanas and pranayam. That's all it stopped at. So again, the distinction is important. Swami Rama is somebody who did push the body consciousness to the limit. So just because you're a Hatha Yogi doesn't mean you have it. Just because you practice asanas, pranayam doesn't mean you have it. But if you have worked for it, yes, then you have it. Swami Rama had additionally also the development of the true yoga, that is amplifying and elevating of consciousness towards self. And this work he had done. So I'd straight away distinguish him from many other famous Hatha Yogis today who are famous because of internet or other things. They may have written books, they may have lot of details of practices and forms of practice, all of which might be useful. But they may not have these two things. That is the spiritual aspect that comes from the Hatha Yoga proper, nor the body consciousness aspect that may have come from really working on that direction of the body awareness. So yes, Swami Rama did develop body awareness. And so to a great extent, what he was able to do was this body-mind, tapping into the body-mind. And that particular experiment where he was able to shift, increase temperature, lower temperature, or create a temperature differential, it came from the body-mind into which he had partially entered. The ability to stop the heart, for example, is also a partial entry into body-mind. It is not a full awareness of body-mind, and it has not gone at all into the cellular consciousness. I'll give an example here. I don't know if you've seen people who can move their ears. So this person, for example, he will move the top of his ear like this, flap them without touching, of course. Look, both ears move. And you ask yourself, how do you do that? Or there are people who can take the tongue, stick their tongue out, and then turn it sideways. And you try to do that, and you'll find your tongue is unable to respond to what you want. You intend it to flip, and it doesn't. You intend your ear to move, and it doesn't. Try the same experiment with your feet, the toes of your feet. Move all the fingers, yes, you can do. Now move one single finger separately from others, you cannot. The moment you try to move one, they all move together. Now all of these represent lack of development of body consciousness in that part, and as a consequence, lack also of continuity from your mind awareness to the body awareness. And as a very simple exercise, try to do this. Every day, you move your toes. You'll probably have them move all together. Then you move only one, let's say the fat thumb of the toes, and then the first equivalent of index finger in your toes. At first, you will not be able to. Massage that toe. Move it up and down by force until you are able to isolate the sensations of that toe from all the other toes. And at that point, try to move it slightly. And you will notice you are actually able to isolate the sensation and move that little toe, well, the index toe, by about a millimeter. not more, because the muscles have not developed, but you're able to isolate the sensation and move it. So the key here will be, can you isolate the sensation? Once you can move. But if you can move, you find your muscles are not sufficiently developed to move anything more than a millimeter. But you've already got the first step done. Now every day you move a little bit, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, and the muscles will grow by use. And at the end of, let's say, about a month, you'll find that finger of the toe, you'll be able to move quite a bit in isolation from all others. Now, this is a very basic, simple practice. You can try and test for yourself. It works. It's not difficult. If you can do that with the toe, you can do that with your tongue. You can do that with your ear, and eventually you can do that with the heart. What would it mean for the heart? Exactly the same process. Can you become conscious of the sensations of the heart? Once you're able to feel the sensation, can you isolate the sensation from the rest? Once you're able to isolate, can you modify the sensation and with that slow down or speed up? Once you can speed up or slow down, you can actually slow down enough until you can stop and then restart, etc. So this is easy to do as a consequence of having worked on the body consciousness through a series of asanas and having directed life force through pranayama to specific parts of the body to amplify the consciousness in that body. And a basic hatha yogi without a spiritual dimension should be able to do that with a little bit of effort, if that be his intention. So what you see in Swami Rama's capacity is this tapping into, and it's a first tapping into body consciousness into layers which are currently under the realm, under the domain of conscious awareness of the body mind. And you can then push subsequently layers and layers all the way through until, in principle, theoretically, all functions of the body can be brought under control of the mind and can be modified at will and then allowed to continue automatically with their automatism at will, in principle. The same way as you control your breath. You're able to become conscious of your breathing and you're able to slow down, speed up, or stop. And everything should be possible, including digestion and other functions, including even the healing. Now, in Sri Aurobindo's case, this was the natural consequence of the infusion of consciousness into the body, and particularly the higher consciousness. So, for example, what we are describing now would be infusing your mind awareness into the body, and with that, pushing the boundary. And you can do quite a lot. But it takes time. As I said, moving that toe might take up to a month. Being able to control your heart might take a few more months. I don't know. That's because the mind is less capable and itself less conscious. But if now you bring a higher grade of consciousness, let's say an intuitive consciousness or a descent of the higher spiritual force of the mother into the body, immediately, within seconds, that part into which it has come in the body becomes conscious and is intensely conscious during the time that that higher force fills it. And at that point, you can actually become conscious and acquire a control and gradually grip into layers of body consciousness, which normally would take years and years of effort through hatha yoga processes to get control of. But this you could achieve maybe within a few days or a few weeks at most, because of the working of the higher force. And so this would be the natural consequence of the top-down working in the method of the integral yoga with the descent of the spiritual force. Sri Aurobindo, in this case, had taken the body consciousness to such a degree, he said that even it was possible for him to drink poison and take it through the entire passage without having any consequence, and the body being able to either manage the poison by digesting, breaking it down and digesting it, or eliminating it entirely without any distress to the body itself. And that shows quite a remarkable achievement, for which he did not have to do any of the Hatha Yoga practices. So you understand the value of the Hatha Yoga practices, they are useful, but the working of the higher force can achieve the same equivalent by a much more rapid and a much more direct process. But still, in all this, it is the body consciousness that is being tapped by your mind initially or by the higher force. And then from there, you can continue into the mind of the body and to the mind of the cells. And that would be the natural sequence of going deeper and deeper. Of course, the moment you start doing this, there's an influence which goes into the next two layers also. And already at this point, without being conscious of the mind of the body or mind of the cells, you can put an intention which can, so to say, burrow through into those layers and begin to make changes there. So for example, you could put an intention for this part of your body to become more flexible or to become more strong or whatever. And then by consciously doing this with the influence of mind in the body, working on that layer which is now accessible to you, the deeper ranges would begin to respond. I have personally seen this and also experimented with this with the building of muscle, for example. I've seen somebody who was working on the body. I mentioned this perhaps. Initially, he would work 2 hours in the gym. And then when he read from Sri Aurobindo that the mind influences life force, which influences body, he began to put that into practice in the way he was working on the body. And after a while, he told me he was able to get the same swelling of the muscles that was coming after 2 hours. He was able to get it in 20 minutes. Then a few months down, he told me he was able to get it in 2 minutes. 2 hours of work in 2 minutes. And at that point, I have to tell you, I was a bit skeptical, but I had to trust him because he was saying it was possible. And then he showed it to me. And he actually did a simple stretch. He said, I can do any movement. And he did a simple stretch of extending his arms and bending down and concentrated on the muscle. It was about 2 minutes. And then he showed his arm and poof, the muscle had swollen up dramatically. So yes, this is possible. And as I said, its direct action of the spiritual force gives you the results of the Hatha Yoga process by more direct process. But all this is initial entry. The question is, even as a Hatha Yoga practitioner, did you intend to really develop that and go deeper into that? If you did, yes, you could go quite far. Swami Rama is a very good example. So I think that should answer Vaijayanti's question. Unfortunately, most Hatha Yogis do not even consider this dimension of wanting to awaken the body consciousness or even go to the cellular consciousness for a spiritual goal. It is at best something that happens indirectly or as a novelty. Oh yeah, I can do this. Or my master could do this. I should be able to get to that point. And it represents an achievement of the mastery of mind over body. And that's about life force over body. And that's about it. But the idea that you could go down into those layers and awaken there an opening to the spiritual is not there in the Hatha Yoga tradition in the way at least that it survives today. But one could. And I would expect that in the next few decades, because of Sri Aurobindo's and the mother's work, this idea may actually seep into that domain also. Revati has a question. She writes, Mother has said that it is the psychic being that will transform into the supramental body. Will it materialize in that sense? What will be the role of the material body then? So this is something which last time we had not gone fully in depth. We had read Sri Aurobindo's description where he speaks of the body itself being brought to a point where it could be by occult or material means extended, its life could be extended to unlimited degree. And what would be the consequences or not of that? That was the discussion, and we had limited ourselves to the text. But this question evokes something important which I would like to clarify, and it was an important point which should have come last time. That the body consciousness, or let's say the body capacity to continue indefinitely, is not a spiritual capacity. It is still the normal working of the body, modified, and as I said, you activate certain grooves of body habit by which it can continue to rejuvenate itself. But underlying that is the continual decay and death of the cells of the body. So each cell is born, peaks, decays, dies, and other cells are born, peak, decay, die to replace the first. And in a continuous movement of replacement of old cells by new cells, the body remains young, let's say indefinitely, or at least much longer than the normal human lifespan. But this is not what Sri Aurobindo is talking about in terms of the body transformation. And that was not there in the text which we read last time. So I had stayed with the text. But in the text which I alluded to, which was the last few articles of Sri Aurobindo, where the supramental manifestation upon earth, where he speaks of the body transformation, There, he does come into this and points out that this continuous replacement of cells is not the spiritual transformation of the body. When the physical cells acquire or awaken to the supramental consciousness and they begin to live by its law, then they don't need to die. They don't need to degenerate. They don't decay at all. Or if that happens, it is by willed conscious choice and a process of choice. So you say, all right, I shed and renew, and by choice. Otherwise, you don't need to, because there is no constant tendency of decay. So this represents something fundamentally different. It means the very same substance potentially is plastic enough and living by higher law that it continues and is not under pressure to decay even, is no more operating from the universal habit of decay and death which is embedded in the cells. So such a substance, even though cellular, would have a very different degree of consciousness and would be far more conscious and plastic than anything we can imagine and conceive of today. The closest equivalent you might find is when you experience the subtle physical matter or you are in the subtle body, where obviously the body does not age, it is plastic enough that it can change form, shape as willed, and does not need to age, and is effectively immortal for as long as you choose to keep it. There you experience what it's like, and that same grade of consciousness and plasticity one would have in the physical tissue body cells. This is what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to, but not yet the supramental transformation. This would still be a spiritualization of the body, let's say, whatever term when we use, to an extraordinary degree. But a supramental transformation would be when this substance now actually becomes conscious of the supramental grade of consciousness and lives by its law, not just any degree of the spiritual consciousness. And at that point, it would undergo a fundamental transmutation in its substantiality, which would be then the base of the supramental body, born in the supramental way. And towards this, that the mother says that that body would be the materialization of the psychic being. And we have here a very interesting insight, which Sri Aurobindo did not obviously state, but he left that working to be, let's say, developed and articulated by the mother. And so she says how she saw that it was shown to her, that's how it will happen. So you see, here we have to describe two things. And look back at all our discussions earlier about reincarnation and what happens after death, and so on. So you see, there's a biological evolution, and then there is a spiritual evolution or a psychic evolution behind. As the psychic being grows, the biology, mind, life, body have to also grow to be able to express it and to keep up with its growth. If the psychic being grows too much and the mind, life, body cannot keep up, it sheds that and takes on a new one to match what it needs currently for its growth. If the biology consciousness potential is highly developed and the psychic is not sufficiently evolved to be able to make full use of it, then you see a person with a lot of potential in the capacity of the inherited body, but the psychic being is still kind of, let's say, less mature and unable to fully utilize. Nevertheless, it has a much wider and freer playground of opportunities for its growth, and then can grow more rapidly, perhaps, or more widely, more richly. So we see two different parallel movements of evolution, the physical, vital, mental, and that evolution is largely driven by or carried forward by the heredity and the material that is transmitted in the biology process of giving birth. And then there is the evolution of the soul, which is using this as a vehicle. Now, these two things are going parallelly. There's a point where when this substance of the physical body itself has to be divinized in a supramental way, it means some potential inherent in the biology has to wake up and fully replace the course working of the biology. That potential is supported by the soul, and in fact is the soul's infusion, the psychic being's infusion into the physical consciousness. So it would be the psychicized physical consciousness which is there, which becomes more and more replacing the coarse and non-psychicized physical substance. Until at some point, the psychic infusion itself, having acquired the density of the physical body, begins to replace even the functioning of the physical body by its own substance and the freedom of its functioning. So, psychicized physical substance becoming more and more dense, concrete, and replacing more and more the materiality of the non psychicized substance until eventually you have the physical body itself formed of the psychic substance. So, you can see a graded process by which the two begin to join until the psychic being and its expression in matter, in life force, in mind, now fully takes over and replaces the substance which was taken from outside to be thrown back, and is now really is substance of the psychic being in that grade of vibration. So here you get some idea of what that process would be, but it would be a joining of the inner and outer lines of evolution into a single evolution. And it's quite an extraordinary idea when you think about it. But for the moment, you can, although we can see the and feel the truth of it, and even experience something of it in the to the degree that certain parts of our physical consciousness can be psychicized, this full materialization of the psychic is difficult to attain because of the insufficiency of consciousness in the physical body. For those of you who start to begin to work in this direction, it's obvious that yes, this makes sense, it feels right, and it's the direction things have to go. But you also experience the resistance and the time it takes for the body, its tendency to relapse, its tendency to fall back into old habits, etc. And that's why the psychic being is unable to do this on its own. It needs the action of the higher. And that's when the supramental force entering the physical consciousness can literally lift it, reshape it, recast it until it acquires the similar quality or characteristic of the psychic consciousness. And then the psychic infusion and the psychicization can be extremely rapid and detailed and deep, substantially filling and taking over and even replacing in that sense. But it's again descending from above in the evolution, joining with the horizontal external appearance of the psychic being in materiality. And that's how you get an idea of the physical transformation into supramental physical body. I think that gives you a pretty good idea of this. There's an interesting sonnet of Sri Aurobindo where he hints at this in a very general way. And the sonnet is called The Body. I will read a few lines from this. Let me see if I can find that here. Okay, I don't have this here. Let me see. I might still be able to find it, but there he speaks of the body itself in relation to the larger soul consciousness and how small it is. And yet it is in the physical body that the key to immortality is found. Let me see if I'll find it now. So the sonnet itself is called The Body. And the lines go like this. This body, which was once my universe, is now a pittance carried by the soul. So the soul is larger, the body is inside. Its Titan motion, the soul's Titan motion, bears this scanty purse, pacing through vastness to a vaster goal. So the soul's journey is carrying the body inside it. Too small was it to meet the giant need that only infinitude can satisfy. That's the soul's need is for infinity. This is too small. He keeps it still, for in the folds is hid his secret passport to eternity. I don't read the rest of it. For those of you who want, you read it on your own. But this line is very important. He keeps it still. So if you say that for the soul's giant need, only infinitude can satisfy, what is this? Why are you keeping the body? Why do you even bother with it? It's too small, isn't it? He keeps it still. For in the folds is hid his secret passport to eternity. So, folds of the body, what is this reference to? It's the layers and layers and layers of consciousness, all the way down into the most material. These are the folds. There's elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo has a private record of one of the symbolic dreams that he had, in which a book is opened and pages are revealed, and then he finds nature entering between two pages, a woman, a form of a woman entering. I don't remember the details now. And then after that, he makes a comment. Through this particular dream, the secret of immortality was revealed to him, or the secret of life was revealed to him. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact text now. It's something I read long ago. But you get a hint there of what it is like. The way it works in our consciousness, every experience that we have, every grade of development of consciousness that we have, each is as if falling down, descending and settling and sinking all the way into the subconscious. So layers and layers and layers. That's the way we are built up. If you see the operations of our body consciousness, again, layers and layers and layers. How deep does it go into the subconscious, into the inconscient, in matter itself? Eventually, perhaps. But this layering is key here. So in the folds of consciousness, in all these layers, is hid his secret passport to eternity. Now, why you're speaking of the soul's passport to eternity? The soul is already eternal. So obviously this is speaking of something more. And the eternity here is, I'm going to state it in a way which is much more general and it goes outside the exact wording of this text. But think of it this way. The soul living in a higher plane, its own diviner ranges, let's say, does not need to incarnate. It can live there and experience reality from there. But if it wants to experience these levels of reality in terms of these levels, then, well, it has to come down to these levels. So let's say the soul now takes on substance of mind to enter the mental world and experience mental world in mental terms. Takes on substance of vital and enters the vital worlds and plays with whatever experiences freely. For eternity, no problem, no compulsion. Remember, soul is free. And then it says, hey, but I want to experience the material world through material senses and material processes. That's when it has to take on a body, isn't it? So it could materialize a body, bypassing the birth process, experience this, and then dematerialize, which also is possible. But if it wants to experience, not just experience, but actually participate in the evolution of the physical world and the physical substance, then the materialized body would be insufficient. It would need to take on material that belongs to the physical world, identify with it, and then through that experience the physical world, and then push the material into its evolutionary possibilities. That's what we are doing as human beings. We have entered this domain for this experience. Okay, so in this body now, having identified with it and experiencing the physical world, we have the possibility now to experience all the other gradations of consciousness. Not only in those worlds, you go out of the body and experience those worlds, but now we have the capacity to infuse those worlds into this physical substance. And this is the key idea. All gradations of consciousness above are implicit in the physical consciousness and can be woken up from within the physical. Effectively, the entire world domain of all the gradations of all the worlds here hidden and activated and awakened fully, you would have the experience of all those domains in the physical world. And then at that point, if you've also awakened to those worlds at the same time while you're in the physical embodiment, you can also be conscious on other levels. Then you have the total experience of all the worlds with their full potential, including the full potential of the physical world. It is towards this that our whole evolution in the cosmos is growing towards. This is why we have taken birth. This is the adventure of consciousness. This is the point of incarnation and reincarnation. And you see the potential that this has in unfolding all these layers in the physical material substance is what Mother was referring to in what we read last time. The body might be the most extraordinary instrument, potentially. And this is not yet achieved in the universe, at least to the kind of degree that we are speaking of. There are perhaps very evolved beings, there are perhaps very evolved bodies, but this full potential has not yet been worked upon. And because for this, the supramental consciousness has to enter the physical and work to awaken this full potential. And that Sri Aurobindo says has not yet been done. So he keeps it still, for in the folds is hid his secret passport to eternity. In all these folds, which correspond to other planes of consciousness and their potential, etc., is this passport to eternity. And this eternity is the eternity of experience across all the planes of consciousness and in the physical world itself. The experience of that eternity and infinity and divinity. So the hint is there in this particular sonnet. That's why the body is so important. So we come back to Revati's question. I think it's sufficiently answered. And I go now to Maureen's question, which is in the same direction. She says, "Thank you for this truly extraordinary lecture, which I could say I have waited a lifetime to hear articulated. In response, one could restate that the body is a container of fine organs of perception, largely unactivated." So you see how she has worded it. It's a very interesting way of looking at it, that here within the body being a container, you have all these fine perceptions and they still can be woken up, the way she's articulated. That we live in a state of consciousness that employs the lowest level of functioning these organs provide to the human entity. These organs in their entirety are incipient organs of perception with potentiality. We are blind at this stage to their state of potentiality. This makes me rethink of Jesus' story of Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. The allegory here as another level of perception within a touching story could be understood as the master's ability to activate the sleeping organs of perception from their death-like state. So both points are valid. One could, as an allegory, look at this as a potential for awakening within us, things which are, so to say, in a state of death-like condition or sleeping or even totally lost, unconscious, subconscious, etc. And we can look at it as a container for fine organs of perception, which can be still opened fully. But I'm going to go to much more than that. It's not merely organs of perception, not even merely organs of action. We could add to that. Organs of perception had finer organs of action. It is not merely a container. The container itself goes beyond being a container to becoming the substance, the thing itself. And yes, we can still see it as a container, but now a container of all things above condensed into this layer. There is a phrase, there's a line in Savitri first, which unfortunately I have not been able to find, where Sri Aurobindo describes our body as if using a certain word which represents the condensation of all the gradations at the bottom of a wine barrel. So I don't remember the lines, so I'm just going to describe the image. And the way he's described it, it's as if there's a wine barrel, and when you leave the barrel sitting for a long time, the sediment comes down to the bottom, and that's the bitter part. And our physical world and the body in the physical world represents that. It's an idea which comes from the Veda. I believe the word in Sanskrit used is uchishta, that which is remnant, the remnant, crude remnant of all the worlds, as if sinks down to become the physical world. And here is an idea there. It's not just a container. The substance of the container is substance of all the other planes in their densest, coarsest, most material gradation gathered here. And so all perceptions of all the worlds and of all gradations, all organs of action, all powers of action, not just organs, of all the gradations are all present here as if, so to say, sleeping. And to that extent, we will push Maureen's description and say, yes, to that extent, we are functioning at the lowest level possible. I wouldn't even say that. I will say we have already emerged from the lowest level. That's what makes us human. Lowest level would be what you see among animals. So let's say the ape is on the brink of emergence. But before that, most of the animals living almost instinctively would represent more closely the lowest level. And we have, so to say, just crossed that threshold where we start awakening to this higher possibility. So yes, it's another interesting way of looking at this whole thing. Critical to all this is the necessity of suppleness of the body, for the body to be able to adapt to express the emergent consciousness, whether from above or from within, to draw out its potential. And of this, again, the mother has an interesting comment. She says, in 300 years, the human body will be far more flexible than we can imagine. I think it's in the agenda. She makes this comment. And this word 300, I find interesting. It pops up again and again. She said once, Sri Aurobindo said it'll take 300 years for the supramental body. But the idea that 300 years down, the body will become far more flexible than we can imagine. What can we imagine? We'll look at the acrobats and a little more, push that, and then go even more. That's where it becomes interesting. But how will that happen? Is it because acrobatics will be part of our training? No. It's because of the pressure of evolution pushing the body flexibility already. And as a consequence, it might happen, for example, that children might find acrobatics interesting. They might find interesting to push the boundaries of their body's flexibility, and which you see already happening today. For example, most adults feel the need for some kind of physical exercise. And it's not just that the doctor tells you to do it. That's when we activate the effort. Doctor says, oh, you have a heart condition, you must walk so many steps every day. That's when we make the extra effort. But otherwise, almost everybody is somehow pushed from within to want to exercise the body more. And this is happening from an evolutionary push. And in a large part, it's also the work that the mother did to infuse into the human collective consciousness, the awakening of the body consciousness and the push to participate in this awakening. So it's difficult to make this statement without people questioning, how can you say it was the mother's work? Well, I will give you the evidence which I point to. In 1940s, when the mother started the physical education program in the ashram, there was no such interest anywhere in the world to do physical activities or exercise. People did exercise if they were gymnasts or athletes. Normal people did not do because they lived a normal life, isn't it? But from that point, let's say, late 40s, early 50s, normal people now found it interesting until at some point, a normal person does daily exercise of some kind. That starts from there. It was not there for centuries, for millennia perhaps. It starts from the point mother starts it in the ashram. And that's the evidence on the basis of which I will say it's in fact the mother's work to infuse this into the collective consciousness. And there are many other things she has done in this way, which was really the work of the avatars, Sri Aurobindo and the mother, working upon humanity. They came, they did their work, where they left their body, they're still there, but they left their body. And for them, it does not matter whether you recognize this or not. As has happened with prior avatars also. They don't really care about recognition. They have done the work. And maybe even in this case, they continue the work. If we are conscious that the help is actually coming from there, we can open more directly to the help and receive it then more completely. And that's the choice you can make. So I leave Maureen's question. The key idea, though, is flexibility of the body. Growing in 300 years, even if you make no conscious effort right now. But on the other hand, start making the conscious effort, start working to make the body more conscious, and so on. We discussed that last time. So I'll look at a few more questions. Rajan has a comment, which is from the session before last time, when we had taken his question. He says, in last week's discourse, you mentioned the accomplished singer Dilip Kumar Roy. I've heard an interesting anecdote about him, I think from my father. I wonder if you can confirm it. I heard that he used to sing so beautifully that Lord Krishna himself would dance in front of him when he sang. Those with vision could see that, but as I recall, the singer himself could not. Is that true? I don't know, but I've heard it this stated that he would invoke that presence. That is true, but whether he could see and or not, or others could see or not, I don't know enough. But to me, that's not so important. The fact is, he had this very deep relationship, and in the chant, in the call, the intensity of the call, there was a certain manifestation. I do know that he had visions of Shri Krishna also. But then Rajan continues, in answering my question from the previous week, you asked me to look inside myself. And that very likely you have a part in you that is a very musical part, that you enjoy certain styles of music when you get immersed in it as if you're a connoisseur. So he says, I don't recall telling you about it in our meetings, but you're exactly right. I have no musical ability, but love listening to certain types of music. I'm especially fond of devotional music, usually Sanskrit or Tamil, but classical, Western classical as well. I have known this for many years, but have never known why. As for other aspects, the last time we met, I had mentioned that my mental intellectual side is dominant, and I very much like gaining insight. At that time, you had said it was because of past life influence. Perhaps that is one reason why I find Sri Aurobindo so fascinating. His writings are so deep, so broad, and so precisely articulated that an inquisitive mind could spend decades immersed in it. So, and I want to give this as an example because Rajan has brought up this aspect and the conversation that we had. Certain thing he had described of the mind's interest, and I had pointed out to him that it was an influence or a part developed from a prior life. And so when his question had come about elements carried over, I was remembering him and I had the very distinct perception, maybe from that contact or recalling it, of this musical aspect within him. And that's why I gave that as an example, intending it to be highlighted for him, which he has confirmed. But this is something interesting which I want to share with you as a personal experience. For many decades, most of my life, I've mentioned before that I had a certain block about past life recollection. And it was as if a decision was taken to be fully tuned to the future with no baggage of the past pulling back. Even heredity, biological family was something which I refused to even connect with emotionally or in any way, to be fully free for that. And it was a very strong impulse, which obviously comes from the soul's choice in some way. And it was only somewhat recently, maybe about 10 years ago, I think now, as a result of certain experiences being stabilized within, that it was as if suddenly that block was removed. And now I was free to, if I wanted to. But of course, there's no interest because it's not done the priority. But from the point the block was removed, I found two things happening. First, that where earlier I could feel certain influences from the past, they were still there as influences, and I was aware they came from, let's say, tendencies from prior lives. And although I was not looking for anything in the past, I could now sense equivalent things in people. So what I found, and this is what I want to share as an experience, as long as my own perception of that thing was blocked by choice, the perception of that thing in others was also blocked. From the point this was freed and was accessible, spontaneously, I was able to sense the tendencies in people. And it's like this. You look at a person deeply and you sense them often in many layers. And it's as if certain things stand out as very clearly formed tendencies. And it's clear that it's not something formed in this life. First of all, it's deeply rooted. And it is not integrated with the surface personality in a way that is still a preparatory mode. It's already formed and existing, and at best acts as a strong influence in the surface personality, but it's there. And then it's obvious it comes from a past life because it was not worked upon in this life. So one can sense things like this in people when one becomes conscious of those layers. And depending on the degree to which you are conscious within you of layers of consciousness, eventually, let's say, approaching your own inmost presence, you tend to become conscious of those tendencies in others. And as with any development of consciousness or skill or perception, one has to be very careful initially. Any perception that comes, assume that it is mixed and wait for a clearer uh, clarity to form, to emerge from the deeper insight. And one of two things happens. Either from within, in a touch of the soul's discrimination, one feels where it is mixed and to what extent it's not, and the separation takes place. Or from a development of the intuition above, there is the clarity not only of what is true and what is mixed, but also sometimes with the intuition, much more comes out. Initially, you simply observe, and then verify, wait for indications to confirm from outside, and so on. So, bit by bit, the moment you engage with a certain interest and push, that itself clouds and mixes. You must be completely still, clear, with no expectation, and wait for things to emerge. When they emerge, you wait for them to reveal themselves, justify themselves, or expose their mixture. And that state of complete stillness and disinterestedness is essential for this kind of a perception to grow and develop. And I'm placing this as on record because it might be useful for some of you as you go through similar kinds of experiences. So we go to the next question. Dhriti has written, I'm writing to you to express my joy and a question I had for a very long time. It's wonderful that the topic now is about reincarnation, and I'm finally getting clarity of something I've been inquisitive about for my whole life. But the question follows. It has been a while since I started consciously observing certain triggers that retrieve some kind of memories. So it seems as if some memories are coming forward when certain situations happen as triggers. Although I cannot clearly see these flashes, I feel a sense of intense emotions. Emotions that I haven't ever felt before. These flashes last for less than a millisecond and they disappear even before I can process what is happening. And all I'm left with is that intense feeling that slowly disappears also. It feels so very personal, like I've been there or experienced it. These triggers could be anything, such as looking at a picture or a house or a place. Once that feeling disappears, I don't feel it again, even after I stare at the same picture. Could this be something related to my previous life? How can I tackle this? I'll be relieved to find an answer to these questions. So the description is interesting. There are two possibilities. In one, the first glimpse triggers a memory which comes from a past life and impression, but we'll discuss what comes. And then the second time when you look, it does not happen because now you're looking and observing the process of the trigger. You've too mentalized yourself, and there is not just the clarity and the what I discussed, what the phrase I used earlier, that you have to be completely still, equal, and without expectation. Now you're coming with an expectation, and so it blocks it. Okay. So if it is a past life memory and it's not being triggered again, it's because of this state of expectation. But more often than not, when it is a past life memory, the same image might trigger something again. But with this qualifier that too much of your expectation mixes in. The second possibility is that when there is something triggers, it is not necessarily from past life of that thing, but some association with that. And it could be either a past life impression or something you had at night in a dream state, which is being triggered also. And the two could be quite different. So we are in a domain now which is quite subjective. So I'll give pointers and I'll broaden this question to similar experiences others may have so that we can discriminate between the two things. So when there is a trigger which evokes something which is seen in a dream state or which is felt in the night in some part, and you wake up, the memory of it is gone, and then a physical contact, a physical trigger draws something of that. It's similar to what we call deja vu. You suddenly have the feeling, oh, I've seen this before, I don't know where. And then the moment passes, the feeling passes, and you wonder what happened. But in that moment when it happened, it's as if not only I've seen it before, I know exactly what will happen in the next and the next moment. And then you're so surprised that the whole thing falls and stops. So it's happened sometimes when the deja vu happened. I try to extend that state, consciously holding that state, recognizing what was the character of that state and how far can I push. Can I live in it permanently even? No, it doesn't. It fades after a while. At least I couldn't get it to go. I could extend it, but not too much. And it could be that there was a portion of that event which was perceived in one of the dreamlike states as you approach the physical world, as you wake up, you touch upon tendencies which have already formed, materialized enough that they are going to happen. And when they do happen, it triggers as if a memory of a dream scene. This is one type of what we would pass off as deja vu. But the other thing is where it triggers a memory of much more than just knowing what this is. It's as if, oh, not only is this familiar, but it's almost as if I have lived an entire lifetime in this, or had a strong experience of something, whatever it is. But it is not related to the picture itself completely. You see a house or a scene, and then a lifetime's memory comes. You see a war, and then the memory of having been in a war, but with different images or associations or details than this picture. But the picture was the trigger, etc. So when you have a different content, then it's possible it could be from a different lifetime. Generally speaking, though, one has to be wary, because it's possible that you pick up things which are in the environment which are not of your lifetime. It could happen in a family, for example, a grandparent who has passed on, and the part of them which is very strongly attached to you now joins with you in some way in the vital energies typically. And so even you might feel, they are with me. I feel as if their love and affection or their help is with me. But with that would come memories which belong to them and not to you. And you might have such triggers. It could happen that at the time when you were incarnating, you took on materials and you even took on certain memories which were useful for you or which were given to you to help you. So we had a detailed discussion, and I think at some point we'll put this online. We had a session with Mark in France last month on this topic of reincarnation, where we discussed some of these possibilities. And one of the examples he gave was, you're about to incarnate and you ask somebody's help. Hey, I'm going to go to Earth. What kind of a world is this? Can you help me prepare myself? And that person, and maybe it's your first incarnation on our planet Earth, and that person throws at you a ball of, Mark's vocabulary is ball of experience or information. That is an infusion of consciousness that enters you, and suddenly as it joins in you, you have the experiential content of the elements needed that the person has transmitted to you, which of course come with as memories. Having incarnated on Earth, when certain things happen and a certain event takes place, it triggers those memories. But they're not your memories, they're that person's memories that have been transmitted to you. So that's another possibility. And you could say, yes, it's my past life. No, it's not. And finally, just to add to complication of these memories, if somebody is sitting next to you and consciously communicates or projects a certain memory, or simply as at that point is living intensely a certain memory, you might pick that up and remember it as yours. So the problem with this whole business of memories is that they are fundamentally unreliable in this manner of verification. But let's take it for the moment that they are coming from some source. They may not be actually your past life, but they may be memories you have caught from someone else also. But they're coming from within you as memories. Let's keep an open mind at this moment. And then you don't notice that there are things coming which are much more than what that trigger is. You stay very quiet. Remember what I discussed earlier in following the last question, where I shared how the impressions of in other people came up. It's exactly the same thing within you. You have to stay very still, very quiet, with no expectation, and allow that thing to reveal itself. Wait for it to reveal its own limitations as well as what it conveys. And then that's where two things are essential for you to have a clear certainty: a strong influence of the psychic discrimination, and preferably aligned with that some degree of an intuitive insight. The psychic discrimination will straight away sift and separate that which is truly from your own and that which is not yours. And that distinction will come very clearly from the familiarity felt with that vibration. So your psychic vibration is distinct and unique in the whole cosmos. There is none other like this. And when the thing in the memory resonates in quality with this, you know it is your memory. When the memory is familiar to you strongly, but the resonance is not of your psychic, then you say, it's from some other memory. But it's deep inside, it's embedded. It's mine, except that it doesn't source itself from me, it sources from someone else. And so this discrimination will be first. The second will be the intuition. And if at that point some degree of the intuitive consciousness has developed, it will reveal to you more, it will give you more insight and bring greater clarity. So I think for Dhriti's question, I hope it gives you a full answer. Observe, and perhaps if you have, I'm just trying to see if in the chat box Dhriti has made any comments. It's okay. So see if this helps you for discriminating. I go next to the question from Sumana. It's more like a comment, but we'll read it. Sumana says, the way you read the Life Divine, expand each idea, teach us how to read and understand the condensed ideas within Sri Aurobindo's writings. The way you relate the passages with letters of Sri Aurobindo in the same topic and passages from Savitri, and also to your own experiences and experiences of other sadhaks. All of these are extremely helpful. This topic in particular has touched me very deeply, and it has encouraged me to intensify my sadhana and reprioritize things in life. So I left this as a comment because it reminded me of to share something else on my own experience with the Life Divine. So when I first read the Life Divine, must have been, I would have read passages, let's say, during my school years. But I formally started reading after I had completed my formal education in the ashram school. So let's say about age 21, my teacher was still in the body. And he told me, as you read, if you have questions, you can write those questions and I will reply. And it formed a series that he put in the service letter. So I remember reading at that time. And I read the first chapter and I said, wow, this is very interesting, very insightful. And I understood everything. And then I went on second, third, fourth, fifth chapter. At some point, it was a bit heavy. I had to stop, pause, and reread because the sentence structure was complex. It was long, but I got the idea and I understood what it was. But something inside was bothering me because that same question, why so many words to say this? And I've heard people say things like, oh, that's his poetic style. That is the Victorian style of writing. And no, it's not. There is more to it. And each time he uses a series of, let's say, adjectives, I could feel there's more to it. But at that point, the mind was not sufficiently deepened. The intelligence was developed enough to understand the content, but not enter into the depth which comes later with either the deepening of the intuition or the deepening of the intelligence itself. And that had not yet happened. So I was feeling things, I was sensing things, but I did not have the means to articulate or even to give form to the point where the surface mind would say, this is the value of it. And still, I had the feeling I'm missing it. If I read a second time now, yes, I get much more. I read a third time, I get much more. But why should it be like that? Why can't I get it all in one go? So this was there at the back of the mind. And I understood that my understanding was not deep enough, but that's all it was. And I was satisfied with it. I was not looking for something more. And subsequently, as in my own understanding the depth came in the intelligence as well as the intuitive influence. The depth began to grow. I could appreciate these more. That's when I could also appreciate or feel sad for people who said, "Oh, I read Life Divine 20 years ago. Yeah, I understood. It's over. No, it's fine. Nothing more. That's it." And I've met people who somebody in his 60s who said, "I read Life Divine when I was 20, whatever." And then I said, "And oh yeah, I understood. It was nice, good, interesting book." Stop there. I would have liked to tell the person, reread it now, because of the maturity you have now, you might understand differently, perhaps. But the person didn't feel the need. So it was something which I want to highlight here. The layering of your own consciousness allows you to perceive deeper layers, especially for a text which is more deeply layered, which is not the case for all texts. So we have to understand, first of all, that not all texts offer you this depth. You can, of course, sometimes push and draw a deeper dimension by analogy or allegory, etc., as Maureen did with Jesus' story of Lazarus. You can draw out something, but it's kind of forced. But very few texts exist in which this layering is inherent. And frankly, I've not found too many. Other than Sri Aurobindo, I've not found too many, except occasionally. One of these, very interestingly, is a translation of the Tao Te Ching, which is a Chinese text. But then I read another translation and I found it flat. So obviously, within the Chinese language, there is the capacity to hold something more rich because it uses the symbols of hieroglyphic symbols, so to say, which allows for something more rich to come through. But the translator may catch it or not. And I had found one translation which was extraordinary. I have it somewhere. I'll probably dig it out. But other translations were flat. They didn't have it. So there are texts like this which have a certain depth, and typically they are those which have survived not because of the force of an institution, as happens with many religious texts, but because of an inherent value within. The Bhagavad Gita similarly has that potential, but ideally one would want to read it in Sanskrit to be able to draw that kind of depth. Translations into English would tend to flatten again. But in the English language, to find this kind of depth is difficult. And Sri Aurobindo, of course, is the only one who offers this degree of depth, where literally every comma and every word, you can pause and ask why, and you'll find there is a deeper insight. So I wanted to make this as a comment to Sumana's observation. The goal in doing this is, of course, to help you to first appreciate, and then for you now to be able to appreciate in your own way. And what happens, the mother described, when you read Sri Aurobindo, he lifts you. He draws you into that deeper consciousness from which he writes. And with that, your capacity then to perceive more deeply and in this layered way, and even to experience and receive in one go the full force of all the layers, just like that, that will grow. Until then, it's good to review, reread, and allow the deeper layers to pop up each time as you read again and again. And you notice with that how your own comprehension and insight and experience deepen with that. If you have worked consciously, followed the practices Sri Aurobindo recommends for the awakening of intuition, then this process will be enormously amplified and speeded up. I'm coming to the next question, which is from Sandhya. In many yogic traditions, the ultimate goal is self-realization and thereby liberation from the cycle of life and death and emerging with the Paramatman, the highest self. Is this a conscious choice for the soul not to reincarnate? What possibilities exist for these souls? Do they cease to exist as individual souls, or do they merge back into the Nirguna Brahman or Sachidananda, that is the qualityless Brahman? I also find it intriguing that Edgar Cayce speaks of the soul's ultimate goal as merging with unity, with a capital U. Another related question is, what do the terms like Jivan Mukta freed, liberated while alive, and nirvana, which is extinction of the flame, mean? How do they fit into the framework of reincarnation? So it's an important question, and I will not go too much in depth, but broadly look at this in a general way. So when you say self-realization is the goal in many traditions, Indian yogic traditions, yes, self-realization is certainly a goal, but it's not the last goal. Even in the integral yoga, it is a goal, but there is more to happen after. Having become self-realized, what do you do? This question is addressed differently in different traditions. And the difference is on the basis of what the tradition originally starts with as the assumption of your condition. I'll explain this. So, having come to point of self-realization, where you are now one with self, what that means, to what extent it is so, is again a moot point, and I've discussed before. There are degrees even in what we may call self-realization. You may have an experience of the self. You may have a constant influence from the self. You may have a strong influence from the self, but which is not complete in all the parts. You may be living in a part within you identified with the self, but other parts not being identified or even under influence of the self. All these variations are possible. And eventually you could live in an experience of the self and with a strong influence also, but your experience of the self might be partial, might not be complete. And even that could pass as self-realization. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities which you might put in this box, but for the moment I will just leave the box as it is because it's a box. And having come to that, let's say, to whatever degree, to the extent you are identified with the self, even partially or in an aspect, the freedom of that aspect or of that experience will begin to dominate. What will that freedom choose? That's the question now. You can't say from where you are what that freedom will choose. I'm going to now bypass this whole argument and say it is from that freedom that it chose or you chose to take birth. So having got to that point, would you say, hey, I'm not interested in taking birth, I want to get out of it? Or would you say, now with the greater freedom, I will complete why I began to take birth? Okay, very important point. So in most cases, the reality will be, having attained to self-realization and assuming it is a more complete self-realization and not an aspect of the self, that you would want to continue because you came with that purpose to begin with. So in the traditions where they say goal is self-realization, it does not contradict the purpose of the integral yoga, but it just does not look at what is beyond, or presumes that beyond that will be the choice to exit, which I disagree with this logic, which I already gave. Okay. So the problem is what the traditions presume as your purpose in life and your choice you will make when you actually get to that freedom of the self. And the problem is the presumption, which comes from ignorance. So even if the tradition has many great realized beings, if you go deeply enough, you might find those realized beings gave a very different reply once they got to that point. But let's assume that we have this option before us. So having come to self-realization, let's say, and having put that as your first step, having come to it, you will say, what is there more? And perhaps in that experience of self, you might see the something more and say, oh, I did not realize that this too has to be done, or this too is possible, and I would like to explore this. But that will come from the freedom of the self. But with that comes liberation from the cycle of life and death and merging with the higher self. Yes, kind of. But that freedom was always there. And this is the important thing to recognize. In all the traditions which say that we're bound in the cycle of life and death, the idea that you're bound comes from a logical supposition that the world is a domain of ignorance or illusion. Therefore, you are bound. So in Buddhism, for example, you are bound because, well, there is no self, there is no soul, there is no freedom, so you're in a bound state. How did you come to be? Well, you're just an aggregate, so now you have to disaggregate and dissolve, and that's the nirvana. So the assumption is giving you a certain view of what that thing will be or what the choice will be, having got to there. Or in the other more modern Vedantic traditions, well, we are in a domain of ignorance. You got trapped into it. How? It doesn't explain. It just says you're trapped. So it's very close to Buddhism in that sense. How did you aggregate, or was there a purpose to it? No, nothing. Well, it just happens. You're bound. In the Jain tradition, again, similarly, you're bound, you need to get out. And those who have got out before they totally dissolved stopped to help you there. Great. So there's a lot of presumption. Underlying all this is an internal contradiction. Because at the same time that the tradition says the soul is free, it also asserts that you are somehow bound, although you are truly soul. If you put it in such crude terms, it's obvious it's a contradiction. So Sri Aurobindo has an aphorism which says something like this: 3 times God laughed at Shankara. One of the examples he gives is, I don't remember all 3 now, but one of them is when his mother passed away, he came back to do the last rites of his mother. Soul is free. Why do you need to do last rites? Think about it. So there are things like this which are inherent because there is a dissonance in the presumptions of the tradition. When people have actually experienced things and are not bound within the box of the tradition itself and have freed themselves into the fullness of the experience, it's obvious that we are free. So, to your question, is it a conscious choice for the soul not to reincarnate? Well, that choice is already made. And the choice was to incarnate. If it was a choice not to reincarnate, it would not have entered this. It would have stayed in whatever domain or worlds it wants to be, from there observed or participated or not. But the free choice was already made to incarnate. So when you get to the self, the question really will be, will you say, have I completed my purpose of reincarnation, of incarnation, or do I continue now from the greater freedom that I have? And seen from below, from the ignorance, you cannot decide what the soul might, the self might choose. Again, I'm also reminding you that there is a possibility of a self experience which is a partial experience, in which, in the contact with the self, you experience the world as illusory. And then you might actually say, yes, this is it, I choose to withdraw. And it's an aspect of the self which chooses to participate in that. Or if at that point the self asserts its greater freedom from your limited experience and says, now you realize that there's a point to this and I want to work, I want to continue. And you may come back to reincarnate from a poise of greater freedom to participate in the further work to be done. In the part that incarnates, you may still have, if you're still within the box, the idea that, oh, I have to help others to get free. You may come with such idea, but it comes from the partial experience. When the experience becomes full in itself, it experiences the world as itself, and the whole perspective changes. So, these are the possibilities. In response to the question, what possibilities exist for these souls? All these possibilities exist. Do they cease to exist as individual souls? No. Do they merge back into the featureless Brahman? No. Mother makes this observation: even if they choose to withdraw and merge into the featureless Brahman, even if they choose to, Mother says, once a self, an aspect of the self has been put out, once the soul is put out, there's always a differentiation which remains. Even in the merging, something remains which from outside you can experience, for example, as that particular being who withdrew. And that particular quality, that aspect of the self is still present. Or if you look at it in a different way, to know the self totally, fully, not just in an aspect, is to know the self across time, across space, and across all possibilities, across all worlds. That's when you know it's self truly, at least in the manifestation. In that case, if once it has projected a soul form and then gone back to merge itself, the projection is constantly existent in the totality of time, of past, present, future. And so that aspect is ever present, can never totally merge. Even if the active aspect of it might have merged, the active side of it has said, okay, I've finished my work, I've merged. The part which projected, which now belongs to your past, is still present as an active force in evolution. So there's no true entire merging back if you look at it in this way. So Edgar Casey, speaking of ultimate goal as merging with unity, I'll have to see the exact words. Does he say that as ultimate goal? Does he say that as the goal, but not necessarily ultimate? One has to see the words. But so much of it was also through the filter of his consciousness, and which is and also or what was needed for that person for whom the message was given. So he had to work within the framework of Christianity because he was talking to a space and a time when, if he did not fit within that box, he would have been rejected as devil or whatever else would be the problem at that stage. So he does give extensive quotes, tries to draw out deeper dimensions from the esoteric side of the Bible and things like that, which is all helpful. But you must understand that's the filter of his consciousness and the time when he expressed. If you accept that, and I think it's in one of his readings that he had a prior incarnation in Egypt as where he played a similar role, then you can see that it far predates even Christ and his incarnation. So it's more as if the filter relevant to that person or that time in which things would have been communicated. And I don't think he ever had any deeper or more absolute perspective than what was given for that relevant context. So I think nirvana also we have understood as extinction of ego as a stage in the evolution in the integral yoga. From the point where you experience the self, you can know it initially in two aspects. That aspect which is the transcendence of all forms and limits, and that aspect which is the affirmation of all forms and limits, including them all. And these are two aspects that you meet. In the text of Savitri, you will find this described as the cosmic no and the cosmic yes. And if you read that whole canto, Nirvana and the all negating absolute, I think, where Savitri goes through the experience of Nirvana. And after that, when her ego is completely dissolved, comes the command from the divine. Now that you've experienced the cosmic no, you must also experience the cosmic yes. And then there is a reintegration with the affirmative aspect of the self. So, in that sense, Nirvana has a great value as an experience and extremely precious for the purpose of dissolution of self or thinning, dissolution of ego, thinning of ego at the very least, and also as a preparation for the more complete immersion in the divine consciousness, now freed from even the faintest trace of the ego. So I think these terms you will see in their place in the integral yoga. Sri Aurobindo articulates very clearly. Some of these are also described in the letters. Trinetra has a question. When the psychic being has entered the psychic world, what happens to or where does the individualized mental and vital sheath remain before they join back into a new physical body? It's a very interesting question. I don't know how much I can articulate this with the limited experience that I have of, but I'll put it in this way. Where is the psychic world now? Where is your psychic being now in relation to your physical body, your vital body, and your mental body? It's right there within you, isn't it? But is it inside in a location in the physical body? It's like if you drill a hole, will you get to some part that says psychic? No. Is it in the vital body? No. Is it in the mental body? No. It is as an active presence supporting the physical, supporting the vital, supporting the mental, as a center of consciousness. Okay. But linking in some way, because it has taken on this material, it is holding these together in a certain way. If it were to release these would tend to fall apart, let's say. So the psychic being and the self above, what Sri Aurobindo calls the central being, which presides over and holds it all together. But the psychic being here is supporting, is present, is there as an active influence. But where is it? It's not in a location in these bodies. When right now you go into a state of deep concentration, let's say you go within you and enter deeper and deeper in relation with your psychic presence until you're able to feel it, until you're able to approach it, and at some point even dwell in it. Where is your physical body, mind, life? They're still right there. Where are you in relation to them? You have as if drawn inward into their deeper and deeper layers, into the layers where the psychic influence is strongest, and their substance and the psychic presence join as if, or on the edge where they join. And that's where you are. What is your condition at that time when immersed in the psychic presence? We would call it, somebody outside would say you're in a kind of trance, however shallow or superficial. But it's a kind of trance because you're no more conscious of the outer layers. You hold yourself there. Where are they? They're still there, they're still held. You have not discarded them. The problem comes when you look at these things as separate layers glued together, and if you go into this, then that falls apart. No, they are joined together. There's a continuum, and one holds like a center all of these. Now, this exact same thing you can replicate in the subtle body. You've shed the physical body, you are in your vital, mental, or whatever combination of individualization. You're there, and you're turned out, engaging with those worlds. And then at some point you say, now I need to withdraw. The consciousness turns in, withdraws more and more, dwelling into the psychic. What happens to these bodies? They, so to say, as if go into a state of swoon, stillness, quietness. But in those worlds, there's a very different experience. Physical size is in relation to activation or relation of consciousness. So when something is larger than you, it's because of a relationship set in quality of consciousness. When at that time you change your relationship, that thing shrinks and you feel yourself larger. This is what you see in dream. You remember that experience that the mother narrates. Look straight into the tiger's eye, and the tiger shrank and became a cat and ran away. So here's an experience where the form changed in relation to the consciousness. Well, in those domains, because the form is plastic and fluid, as this movement of introversion takes place, it's as if the subtle body itself is indrawn and acquires increasingly a deepened state of immersion in its own finer psychic substantiality. At that point, to the person who is in the outer layer of consciousness of the vital or mental worlds, they will see the person as if fading out. They're still present, but faded out, no more visible, no more seen. And at that point, you are more and more into the psychic domain, but with the substance of this still held as your own substance, but now withdrawn from expression in the more outer ranges. Somebody who is able to enter that depth of domain of the psychic world could feel you and even sense this form. But he would have to go into that domain and that state. Not accessible to all beings unless they have been sufficiently familiar with the psychic state. Just the same way as you cannot necessarily go into higher ranges of worlds unless you have a familiarity with those grades, or someone or something from that higher grade pulls you in. So it is with the inner. If you have not developed that ability or that familiarity with the psychic vibe, it's difficult to enter the psychic worlds. But to the extent you are able to, you can enter that domain and experience and see these beings in form as if, and you will read in Savitri this whole passage, souls in internatal trance. We read that. So from there again, when the psychic being says, okay, now I'm ready to move forward, it may infuse certain aspects into the vital mental, because now that part is still is sufficiently psychicized. It is its own substance, so to say, and then extend it and move out into the more surface form of active expression in the surface layers. So where did it go? It was always there, but indrawn and absorbed, as if the vocabulary we would use, absorbed in its psychic state, and from there again expressed. I hope you get the idea, because that's the nature of that world. It's so different from here, where form is rigid and fixed. So you have to leave it a shell behind. No, there you can actually withdraw it as if, and to a great extent, to the degree of its psychicization, you can indraw quite a bit. I hope that answers your question. V-Truth has one question. How much is the dependency of the soul on the current crop of humanity in order to help them incarnate? Are there enough types of people with a mindset appropriate to the waiting souls? My personal view, no. Not enough people. There was a time when you had many more conscious, aspiring parents who were refined, conscious, and responsible, and aware of their responsibility in giving birth to a superior grade of substance, of consciousness for a child. There was a time when this was much more common. Today, because of an extreme coarsening of human values and particularly coarsening through the educational system, much of this has been lost or has been ridiculed even. So the idea of living for higher values, living by higher values is laughed at. It's almost as if society rejects you for being idealistic, calls you a fool. When there was a time, on the contrary, where if you were not idealistic, people called you coarse, crude, selfish, or whatever. So the values have almost got inverted in large parts of humanity. And yes, there are exceptions. But to your question, are there enough? No, there are not enough, in my view. But if the soul's evolution or maturity is strong enough, despite those insufficient influences, it may push its way forward and overcome. But it has to go through a lot of struggle. You will remember perhaps in Dina Merriam's narration that even in this life, you will see it, and other lives. In this life particularly, she said from her childhood, she did not like to eat meat. The whole family ate meat and she refused. For her, it was too crude or gross. She doesn't know where this comes from. Obviously, it comes from the prior life and sensitivity of the soul. She just refused. She didn't like it. Now imagine how many years you have to suffer that when the whole family is, well, criticizing you or trying to enforce. Well, if those parents were kind enough or understanding enough or sensitive enough, they would say, all right, we won't enforce it. But if they start enforcing, imagine how much a child might have to struggle. So many examples like this. Or Mark Obern's experience when he found he was going out of the body and everyone, including his own mother, said, you're crazy, and took him to a psychiatrist. Luckily, the psychiatrist understood and said, you're fine, there's no problem. But imagine if at that point they had said, you have to start taking medication, etc. So he was so alone. For decades, he was all alone because he thought nobody else had these experiences and he was the only one. Until eventually he discovered, yes, there are people, there are people who talk about it and so on. But if the parents had an understanding and they said, you're having this experience, it's very interesting, here's some material, here's something to read, maybe it'll help you, and they nourish or guide, might have been a very different journey, isn't it? So yes, to your coming back to your question, not enough types, and which is why it's so important that some of you at least become conscious and make sure your children are conscious and transmit it within the family in a way that those children will know what to do, that when they have children, they can invoke and support and nourish a soul that comes with a spiritual aspiration and with a conscious awareness of its purpose. And to souls which might be not sufficiently awake, that you can help them wake up from the early years itself. And all this can make a huge difference. I will share a very interesting thing which happened to me. This is about when I was reaching 50. I was about 48, 49. Suddenly something shifted and a kind of a panic set in. And I said, my God, I've crossed my halfway point. And what have I done? It's not good enough. I should have been where I am now 20 years ago. It's a kind of a panic set in. And particularly the panic came from the recognition that the situation in the world is so bad that when I come back the next time, I will never get anything close to the kind of support that I got in this incarnation. With my mother, with the help of Pandiji, with the contact with the mother, and the environment of the ashram that she actually accepted to give us that whole access at that age, and which changed everything growing up in this space. It changed everything. And to have that nourishing influence from Pandiji and from my mother, I'll never get anything close to this in the future. And just that created a kind of a panic. What do I do with this opportunity? How do I make the most of it? I won't get that again. I know that. And so with that panic came a certain line of thinking, which I'm sharing here. It'll amuse you or it might inspire you. And I said, I have to do something now that when I come back, there will be at least one pocket of light where I can incarnate and get the support of that light. Remember, this was before this battle of dark and light had taken a decisive turn towards the light. And 10 years ago, there was no hope, literally. The first hope came in 2014 when in the Indian elections, there was a sudden shift. And then the second came with the other disruptors in the subsequent years. We have spoken of in the current affairs. But before that, there was no hope. And at that point, in this, what seemed like worsening darkness, this was the only thing to do. Help to create a space of light where when I come back, at least there'll be some space I could find a good place where some nourishment might be given so that I don't have to go through too much struggle and lose everything. And with that also came this urgency to build the capacity to continue consciously, the carry over our evolution of this lifetime into the next, and which is the theme of our discussion. So I'm sharing this as maybe if it amuses you, otherwise if it inspires you, help to do that in your space. It doesn't mean you have to have your own children. You can still encourage and nourish children who grow up within your immediate family or friends circles or wherever that is. But recognize the potential, provide a space where that spiritual potential is nourished and assisted, and give them the understanding early on of what is happening, why it's happening, what they can do to assist in this evolutionary process. There are a couple of more questions which I will leave aside for now and go to the chat box for today and see if there's something else. Okay, so Anupam has asked what makes Kaya Kalpa or other occult processes fundamentally different from supramentalization of the body consciousness. This is what I explained earlier, and I think now that should be clear enough. Interesting sharing by Jessica, who says, I am a theater music stage technician and part of the stage collapsed on me, crushing the vertebra, and was told that I am partially paralyzed. Yet I am able to use my mind to control every part of my body. Only exception is I have no reflexes on the right side. My neurosurgeon says I can do things other people are not able to do. Yes, it's an excellent example, and this comes from the spiritual consciousness working in and through the biology and the nervous system. It can amplify, regenerate, or override and bypass. Both of these are possible. And I would suggest for Jessica even to work on this consciously. In the part where she feels that there are not yet the reflexes or the full access, let's say, in this case, I'm taking the arm. Suppose it is in the arm. Start from two ends. One is from the inside out, where you infuse your consciousness. And remember, with your consciousness, push life force into biology. Mind pushing life, pushing body. This should be the chain. Okay, so from inside, feel the life energy. Direct it, use visualization, sensation, more sensation than visualization, but visualize to guide the sensation. Push it, infuse it. If you like, feel or visualize, imagine the nerves from the point where you're conscious towards the point where you're not conscious. Infusing, pushing, and with the intention that this life energy substance, feel its substantiality, with the intention that this should actually rebuild, intensify, amplify, regenerate, and push as if building a continuity of awareness. Remember, the nerves are still there. It's the life force in the nerves whose flow is blocked. Push. and it will rebuild, re-grip the nerves. So this is an inside-out process from the part which is conscious towards the extremities which are less or not conscious. On the other side, you do the same thing, but with physical sensation. So let's say it's the fingers. You start with the part which is most conscious. Let's say the fingertips. Touch the fingertips with the other hand or have somebody. See, one of the things they do is massaging. People don't understand what massage does. It's stimulating sensation, but also infusing life force. If the massagist does with an intention, it can have a huge effect. But now you're doing the intention from the inside out. On the other side, that contact, sensation. Depending on the degree needed, trigger enough contact by enough pressure. Observe what works: pressure, temperature, hot, cold, light touch, hard touch, as much rich variety as you can for the contact. If you find that you're unable to have even that, put your hand in the sunlight, for example, and feel, visualize on the fingertips absorbing the sunlight. Put it on sand, mud. Wet mud would be better. Again, feel, absorb life energy. But if you can feel some sensation now, use that as the entry point. So as you feel the sensation, light touch or strong touch, you amplify the sensation by putting yourself into the sensation and as if pushing the boundary, making it larger, making it more intense, making it more deep, building continuity. So outside in and inside out, and the two things join at some point. As you do this exercise, you'll feel the edge of what is where it fades out, pushing, as well as lightly touching as if the sensation part, and then amplifying and extending until the full continuity is built. In principle, there is no limit. But the biology habit, having got used to being whatever it is, you need to trigger it sometimes. So that's where the massage as pressure, but really deep pressure, try to infuse until it touches the nerves inside in whatever way. And if you put the intention in the massagist, or while the massagist does, you put the intention, triggering the nervous system to wake up and reconnect wherever there are gaps. So in between, some kind of trigger to shake up the body and say, wake up. Don't be in the habit of inertia. So combinations of hot, cold, massage, pressure, whatever works. From the two extremes and in between, triggering to wake up. And work on this. If into this, your consciousness, which is making the effort, opens to the higher light force of the mother, invoke that, intensify it first in the parts where you're able to hold, and then from there direct it into the part where you feel less. They will ride your mind's awareness into that part and fill and do much more than your mind can. But your mind's intention has to lead, so to say, the passage of that which flows. And know and intend that it will go beyond, that flow will go beyond even what your mind can sense, and complete this. So that intention, visualized, felt more than visualized, holding it and guiding the working of the force. You will actually feel light, force, warmth of some kind, sensation of some kind in that subtle physical layer, in that part. And that's the sign that the work is going to be accelerated and it will be done. There's no doubt about it. Okay, we come to... Yes, so Anupam says magician Houdini could move all his toes. And there are videos of that. You might find that on YouTube. It's quite fascinating. Somebody's commenting about the teachers and arrogance of teachers. I don't think that's a problem. You see, irrespective of who the teachers might be, yoga teachers is the context. Arrogance is not a problem in itself. It's just how human beings are. It's just that don't project upon the person a spiritual development. He never might have claimed it either. So it's just the problem is when people see somebody famous and talking of spiritual things, they assume the person is spiritually attained. but he may just be repeating what he reads or building whatever he finds interesting. I don't see a problem with that. Fame and name are natural to a strong vital. You don't need a spiritual dimension for that. And if a strong vital has arrogance, it's consequence typically of an untrained vital. So I don't think any of you should give any importance to that aspect of anybody. I'm generalizing. So Brooke is saying that her inner being was able to predict catastrophes in global events, but it has been suppressed. And she says, I'm not confident of my visions and cannot articulate them. I took a psychic development course, but don't feel this helped too much. Any advice on how to tap into this psychic being, given that I don't have much time to meditate or do yoga currently? So this word psychic, we have to be a little careful. When Sri Aurobindo uses the word psychic being, it is the inmost soul within us, the true divine element within. In the way, in the common vocabulary, people speak of psychic powers or psychic development or psychic training, they mean occult sensory powers of the surface consciousness. And they're two very different things. So you'll have to be careful with the usage of these two words. So when Brooke says that my psychic being was able to predict massive catastrophes, I will avoid that word psychic. I will say some part of your inner consciousness was able to, let's say, sense, more than predict, sense certain possible catastrophes. Yes, because this possibility exists. The problem is it is one of several possibilities, and one is able to sense them. You don't always know how to articulate. You cannot be confident of those visions precisely because they are not absolute. They are indications of possibilities. And the best is not to give them too much importance. The mistake people make when they enter the domain of inner vision is to assume that all that they see is it. Because there is not the deeper understanding that in the domain of inner perception, one sees realms, entire realms of possibilities, and they're all present simultaneously. Outside the physical domain, as you go higher up, you have a realm of range of possibilities crowding down as trying to assert their interests, top down. In the physical world, only one or a combination of all these as one outcome is possible. Which of these or what combination you are unable to see because there is not enough deeper perception to distinguish the balance of these forces, or behind them the greater powers which use these forces for a specific outcome. That has not developed. So the problem with all such what we call psychic insight or psychic sight, not of the true soul, but this surface occult inner sight, I will use, or inner perceptions, is that they look at the surface and stop with the surface. So it is generally recommended not to rely upon them, rather take those as warnings when it's negative, or when it's positive, take them as possibilities that if you work hard, you might be able to actualize, or if it's negative, if you work hard, you might be able to prevent. Take them as possibilities purely. So the part which was perceiving these, you should avoid the word psychic being there. You should simply say some inner sight. And even with the opening of the third eye, which is not a big deal, which has no spiritual value in itself, one can begin to have visions of this kind. What is the value? Very little. I remember a book which came out in the 1980s, probably around 84 or 83. And my teacher, MP Pandit, had received that book, which was titled, We Are the Earthquake Generation. And these were people who, in a certain state of trance or channeling of some kind, had drawn detailed maps year by year documenting where there would be earthquakes, large masses of land would go underwater, where new land would appear, and half of Japan was supposed to disappear underwater in the mid-90s. And I remember at that point, around the year when they had that prediction, for half of Japan going underwater overnight, imagine. There was a massive earthquake. I don't remember if it was Kobe, but vaguely that's the name that comes. There was a massive earthquake, and you had pictures of these large highways which were above ground, which had collapsed and things like that. There was a lot of destruction, but no land went underwater. All their predictions, at least 99% of them, turned out to be false. Yet the people who did it were very genuine and they had meticulously done a great job with what they had done. Why? Because, and this is something the mother spoke of when she was asked about this. And this is, I remember my teacher, MP Pandit, saying this. I don't know if it is in writing somewhere, but what the mother was asked about these predictions for great catastrophes. And the mother said, yes, it was true in the domain of possibilities. But she said, as a consequence of the supramental force having been brought down upon the earth in the physical world as of 1956, she said a large number of these catastrophes have either been drastically reduced or modified. So yes, there's still possibility for things to happen, but as it seems like less and less. The worst of that kind of disaster has been possibly avoided. But it is an action of the divine grace that bypasses all these or uses these forces to its own ends, which has modified the outcomes. To a great extent, this also is a reflection of our own state. In spaces where humanity is more misaligned and disconnected from the divine presence, the scope for such negative outcomes is more easy. Where we are more aligned to the spiritual potential, to the divine presence, the scope for a positive outcome is more likely. So, coming to Brooke's question, the psychic development course didn't help. How to tap into this inner perception? I will modify the vocabulary. It's not the psychic being's insight. You must be very clear, it has nothing to do with your true soul's consciousness. How to develop this? There are methods you can develop. Most of the courses online are not of much use because they merely tap into some mechanical process that they ask you to repeat, hoping that something happens. The simple question I would ask is how many of the people who have done those courses actually benefited in any meaningful way? Mostly what happens is someone who had already an insight had it amplified because of some practice they did. And there you understand it's not the practice, it's your intention. By placing more attention on that, that sight grows. By ignoring it, it can also weaken and you can close it. So really the question will be first, how important is this for you? And in what way will it help you in your spiritual evolution? If you feel that right now it interferes with your spiritual freedom and evolution, it is better to avoid these kinds of insights. Because if you see something negative and you obsess and fixate over it, you help it to happen. If you did not see it, you would probably act with great freedom without fear. Having seen it now, you're bound with the fear that that might happen, or you're convinced it will happen, and often it doesn't happen, which is why you feel that you cannot rely on them. But the question to ask is it helping you to have that? Or is it hindering? If it is hindering, better to avoid. If it is helping, or if it is necessary for the particular kind of work, let's say you are working in the field of medicine or in some kind of psychotherapy, and it helps you to see what is behind a certain problem. And I know a few people who have that kind of insight. There it might be useful, used within that context, but do not apply it to your own life, because then you can get into a big mess. So you must be able to first modulate that capacity, activate it when you need, and choose to ignore it when you don't. And then if you find that you need to do it in that state for that particular work, I would say since you have already a kind of an opening, the starting point would be first make yourself very quiet. Put an intention. Ask for the help from the divine consciousness saying, show me what is relevant for my evolution or for that person whom I want to help. Put a filter there consciously rather than just opening to anything that comes. Just that intention is often enough to act as a filter. Equally, the intention to say, I don't want to see anymore is a filter which will tend to close it. But in this case, put a positive intention with a filter. And then keep a very quiet mind with no preconception. So basic training which you have seen for training of the intuition, being able to quiet your mind, remove all attachment or preconception, etc. All those would apply. Use those. And if you can, work on developing your intuition. So even when there is an insight of this kind, the intuition will filter and discriminate or show you a deeper truth or not. So the spiritual growth should be primary. This faculty of inner sight can be secondary under subjugation of the spiritual priority. And then that will bring also greater clarity and greater certainty. For example, it will show you that this thing is possible. If it's a future thing, it's likely, it's possible, but it will also show you how much your intervention could avoid it. And then you can make the necessary interventions to avoid. So start with this basic practice. And then in that state of quiet, you turn towards, let's say, the patient or the situation that you wish to know about, and stay with a quiet mind. Wait for the insight to come. When the insight starts coming, you will find some part in you rushes to catch it. You have to resist that. Stay still. Let the insight emerge. Let it wait. Let it unfold itself with no agitation or restlessness on your receptive part. And wait with patience until it exhausts its unfolding movement and stops. Then you review what was shown to you. You will pause. Hold the state first, not the image. You'll notice the state has more information than the image itself. The image might show, for example, a car crash. The state will reveal to you the quality of energy and how much force it has, and you will sense also certain points of resistance or push. That will give you more insight always. Hold that state. Try to feel what else is known in that state. And bit by bit, it's as if layers of insight or information will tend to pop up. And then that will contextualize the image itself. So this would be your basic training. If you've worked on the basic spiritual foundations of equality and quieting of mind and opening to the higher consciousness, this will be easy then to work upon and develop. But start with this first prioritization. How useful is it for your growth? And then the rest will follow. So EJH has asked how to develop intuition. You can read Sri Aurobindo's chapter Intuitive Mind in the Synthesis of Yoga. I have a series of talks on this topic. I think it is number 62 on the 71 on evenings with Sraddhalu. Sorry, 65 to 71, where I've discussed levels of consciousness and also where intuition comes and how to develop the intuition based on that chapter. You'll find that helpful because practical methods are discussed by Sri Aurobindo, and I've elaborated on certain aspects where you'll find certain practices to be helpful. Light is asking, the real question is name 5 people who are self-realized. I don't think, that's why I said this whole idea of self-realized as an end in itself, as an all or nothing, is completely populist error. And it's better not to think in such terms. It's better to think in terms of deepening your relationship with the self. And then you will see all the degrees and all the variations and all the parts which are involved. All these ideas come from a wrong understanding. Some of it, I'm sorry to say, it comes from a lot of these traditions which speak of instant enlightenment. Some of it comes from the Buddhism which went into Japan and got mixed with certain ideas, which comes back as what they call Satori, and they call it enlightenment as a translation. And then in the Buddhist community, I find they use the word enlightenment to describe nirvana, which is not the same thing at all. So I sometimes, just to provoke this shows how ridiculous it is. You say Europe went through the age of enlightenment, whatever, 100 or 200 years ago. So that means all of Europe has reached nirvana. No. Enlightenment is a rational journey or turning towards reason. It's not even all of Europe became rational. It was a turning towards rationality. That is what is called as age of enlightenment in Europe. What has rationality got to do with nirvana? Nothing. So why use a word which is fundamentally different in meaning for a term which is totally different? So when they say reach enlightenment, it comes from these very bad translations from, unfortunately, many populist Buddhists who were more interested in building a following than in communicating the truth of the Buddhist teaching, who made this translation with equivalence of enlightenment. And the problem now is people have this idea which comes from Satori, where suddenly you wake up and then you're awake and you're enlightened. That's not nirvana at all. There's nowhere in Buddhism this idea that nirvana is anything like this. Suddenly you wake up and now you're in nirvana. It doesn't work. That's not nirvana first. And if you're talking of enlightenment, which is not nirvana even in Buddhism, then it's not Buddhism. So understand that this idea of something happening in one go and then you are it or not it before is completely wrong. Yes, there are stages where you wake up to certain experiences, certain insights, certain stages of consciousness. You fall back from them typically because none of them tend to stay long enough, because it takes time to integrate. How much of integration? What does that state even represent? It might be a state of light of any kind, a mental light. It could even be an intuitive light or a spiritual light, but it is still a light. It is not an realization of the consciousness. And these distinctions are so important. And it is only with the deep background of Sri Aurobindo's teaching that you can appreciate how nuanced all these things would be. If you stay within a flattened tradition, and I don't mean the original tradition, the flattened version of the tradition that is presented popularly, you have all these very wrong ideas. And they're written by people who themselves do not have the experience. They're only repeating what they've understood from somebody else and reduced in their understanding. So it is better not to think in such terms. It's completely wrong even to imagine, oh, 5 people are self-realized. I can show you 20 people who have had experiences of the self, and it's not a big deal. But will you call them self-realized? The problem is with the definition of that word. And what I will say is, when a person is able to concentrate and enter in relation with the self, feel the presence of the self, live in it for a certain duration, maybe minutes, maybe hours, maybe even days, just to get to that point is very easy and within your reach. And I will show you not 20, but many more living people who have that access. Work for this. Don't think of an all or nothing self-realization. Rather, deepen your relationship with the self, with the divine presence in whatever way, aspect, or part of you that you can feel and relate to. This is a much more useful approach from the perspective of the integral yoga. Because remember, in the integral yoga, we want to put all of ourselves in relation with the divine as completely as possible. Start with the parts in you which can feel most easily, and with the aspect of the divine that they can feel most easily. So there could be many points, from your heart a certain aspect, from the mind a certain aspect, from your body a certain aspect, and just start building and deepening that relationship. And you would have reached something far more valuable than many people who might claim to have been enlightened out there, which would mean nothing for most people. And I've met people who have claimed to be enlightened and they had nothing spiritual. Yes, so Jessica speaks of Edgar Cayce having described various technologies even of healing and other things in the past. And all that knowledge, it shows you, is available still. One can tap into it in this way by going into the past, or you can tap directly from above, or as Mark describes, you can receive a bundle of knowledge information from somebody who transmits it into you, and you have the ability, the consciousness, and the capacity to exercise it. And all this is available. None of it will change you in consciousness terms. So there are 2 choices you can make. You can either go into recovering this kind of knowledge and heal people who still stay the same in consciousness, or you can work on growing in consciousness and changing the human condition. And with that, inevitably, all this knowledge will come back. And you have to choose, you have to prioritize which for you is more important. And for us, at least in this discussion, your growth, your consciousness awakening is much more important. And trust that all this knowledge can be recovered very easily. It's not so difficult. Edgar Cayce did it in a way. There are many others who can do it. You can learn to access even specific kinds of knowledge, but build your capacity for that access. And that will come by building the closeness with the divine consciousness. Yes, so I think I'll pause here. If there are any other comments or questions, we'll keep it for another time. Next Saturday is a special occasion. It is one last comment. Brooke is saying, are you saying that I made the catastrophic flood in North Carolina this year because I made it happen by foreseeing it and choosing to believe it? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when you perceive something like this, it is in the realm of possibilities. Sometimes the possibilities are very concentrated, very densified. They will happen despite any effort you make because it has consequence with many other forces than yours. You only saw something happening. You have no say in whether it should happen or not. On the other hand, if it is in the realm where it is still in a balance, not just you, but a large number of people, especially on a scale like this, a large number of people can even intervene by prayer, by changing circumstances to prevent it. This is at the level of floods, where obviously the scope is much larger. But if it is in your life, you see, for example, the possibility of an accident when you're driving a car or a friend of yours is driving a car, there you alone can intervene enough to prevent it sometimes. And so that's where you have a choice to intervene. In other cases, you may not have much choice because your capacity is limited. But if you are living in a larger spiritual consciousness and you saw that happen, you could, with the greater power of that higher consciousness, intervene and prevent even that flood. As you are, you cannot. It doesn't mean you're responsible. You just see something happening. It's not a big deal. But does it help you to see it? If you could prevent it, it is useful. If you cannot, does it help you to see it? So I don't have a problem with seeing things. The problem is, can you still continue on your spiritual journey, or is this distracting you from your spiritual growth? That's what I meant by does it help you? If it does not, if it distracts, it's better to avoid looking at these things. If you see it happen nevertheless, and it does not distract you from your spiritual growth, observe. Use this as a training ground for refining your perception and drawing upon the intuitive discrimination. Observe how much of what you saw came true, how much was mixed. Try to distinguish in the perception itself and make the perception more clear, more true, more reliable. Notice how your state of receptivity changes the quality and reliability of the perception. Work upon that. So in this way, you can make it a part of your spiritual journey. If you can do it that way, that is useful. Otherwise, it's a distraction. I'm giving you a context in which you will put it in right use, if you can. That was my intention. I hope that is clear enough. So I'm coming to, we'll have to close to today. We have crossed our time limit already. Next Saturday is a very special occasion. It is the birth anniversary of my teacher, MP Pandit. And as it happens to come on a Saturday, it would be a useful occasion to speak or share something about him. So I would suggest that for those of you who might have some questions regarding this, about him, about his life, or about his work, if you have any questions, please do send. And on the email, which is the email on which you can send all the questions, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. Send your questions to that, and we will take them up. Or if nothing else, I will share some of my experiences about him, about his life. Not that I have had much. There are others who have been much longer. So if any of you would like to share some of your experiences, you can send those also, and perhaps we will read from those and see where we go with that. It will be a useful occasion to dwell on someone who has been a great inspiration for many thousands, and for me particularly in the sadhana, and whose books, now numbering more than 150, have also been a great aid in the sadhana for people. And we'll hear more about that next time. So it will be a worthwhile dwelling on it. So for today, I would like to close our theme. There are a few more questions. We will merge it into another time when we have scope for questions. We took up this theme of conscious reincarnation with the intention of understanding what happens in this transition, but also what we can do to build continuity. So that when we come back next time, despite the conditions of the world, we may be able to carry whatever light we have been able to gather in this lifetime into the next. But also keep in mind what I had suggested earlier. What can you do today to build in your environment, nourish enough light that when you come back, you can draw upon it also? Isn't it? That should be our goal. Very selfish goal from a certain point of view, but you can use this larger selfishness for a way to also assist in the larger development of humanity. Create within your space as much as possible an influence of light, a circle of light. And it is through these that the new reincarnating souls will find the nourishment to bring also what they can bring in assisting evolution. The mother spoke of this passage particularly in such terms, and I'm saying it in my own phrase now, as the darkness, the tendency for the darkness to grow intensifies, it's not that the darkness has to be everywhere. Where we make an effort, we can hold circles, centers of light. So it will be through these centers of light that the knowledge and the continuity of the evolution would be taken across to the other side of that passage of darkness. So even if it happens that we pass through one of those dark nights of civilization, as the mother warned about, even if that were to happen, we would come through with these little focal points of light. And the question for us should always be, despite appearances of darkness and difficulties in the world, it will end. What will you do to help what happens in the rebuilding after? What can you do now to assist in that rebuilding? What can you do now to protect this spiritual light, presence, knowledge, experience, growth that you have to carry it through? And you don't need to be bound by that darkness wherever it might be in the world. You can be free of it in your little space, individually and collectively, and push through. And that's why the importance of many such spiritual communities. And a community could be just 2 or 3 people. It could be even one as a seed for a community which grows eventually. But wherever we are, we can also have a community which is spread out. You don't have to be in a physical space. You connect on a deeper level, which is possible because of such means through the internet. And so, in a sense, we are a small community. And if we hold within us this aspiration to build this continuity and also to work for the future, which is inevitable, there's no doubt about that. But start now to build for what has to happen. And start with yourself and your life and your immediate circumstances of life. Then we will have fulfilled our purpose individually, but also served humanity and the larger evolutionary purpose of the divine. Let's stay in this aspiration for a while together as an online collective.